or that they will ever get beyond. And so the situation and the atmosphere within a workplace, it becomes extremely challenging. There is going to be ongoing distrust, ongoing animosity, and it makes every round of bargaining thereafter that much more difficult. So in order to actually reach a good collective agreement, there has to be a bit of a relationship of trust. That doesn't mean you have to agree with each other, but you have to be able to be in the same room, to explore what the issues are, to really understand, where the other party is coming from and what are the issues that you're seeking to find a solution to. The best opportunity that you have is to actually have that relationship of trust to be able to deal with difficult issues. And workers need to feel that they have dignity in the conversations in order to actually put forward what the issue at hand is for them. When there is that kind of a dispute where you are basically discarded and disposable, you're not going to feel any kind of empathy towards that employer, and you're not going to have that trust to be able to actually express what the concerns are. And so these are decades-long situations where it's going to be a rebuilding that has to take place, and it needs often a change in management in order to actually rebuild that kind of a relationship.
Thank you for that answer. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce has sent correspondence to the committee talking about the impacts that the legislation will have on the daily lives of Canadians if, in fact, it's passed. It talked about disruption in telecommunication services, our ability to travel when there may be a strike or a lockout. And they talk about the impact on the economy, and maybe there'll be some hesitancy in terms of investors looking at Canada as a place to invest. Can you talk about those comments and whether you see them as valid or not?
I think there's a little bit of fear-mongering in those comments. At the end of the day, what we want is for employers to come to the table with a clear view of reaching a collective agreement. 95% of collective agreements are signed without a labor dispute, without any kind of a disruption, without any kind of stoppage. And in those cases where there is a dispute or there is a stoppage, it's a smaller number where scabs are actually in use. What we are trying to deal with here is those egregious examples where employers have zero intent of actually reaching a collective agreement. And what I'm most concerned about is the economic reality for those workers who are having to walk that picket line.
1.5 minutes left. Well, I guess my last question would be related to when the legislation passes, there'll be provinces that look at this and they'll undertake studies in the future at committees just like the one we're sitting on today. And they'll talk about British Columbia and Quebec and the impact the legislation has had there. We'll implement this and we'll see the benefits and gains that will accrue to unions and their members. How will this help other provinces and territories who may look at this legislation in the future and say, you know what, we should be going down the same path provincially in our respective province?
I think this legislation simply modernizes labor relations in Canada. And so it's beyond time that we actually get to this particular piece of legislation. This is something we should have had for many decades. We see that the sun still rises in Quebec and the sun still rises in BC with this legislation. So this is not egregious. This is actually resetting the balance at the bargaining table to help the parties get to a fair collective agreement.
Thanks for that.
Mr. Collins, good. We got 30 seconds. Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et demi.
For 2.5 minutes, Ms. Chabot. Thank you. Ms. Brusque, it was also raised that this bill does not aim to exclude public service employees. Would you be in agreement that the bill as presented applies to federal public service employees?
I would absolutely be in agreement that this bill ought to be expanded to include all public service workers. We think that that's an oversight, and we think that all employees should have the protection of this bill.
There's something I'd like us to discuss because an anti-scab bill is not to generate conflicts. It's really the opposite. And sometimes we hear people say that there are going to be more and more conflicts that are going to last longer and be more negative. So there's something in the equation that's been left out that you've already cited. Replacing strikers is an obstacle to harmonious labor relations, which can constitute a violation of the right to strike, which is now recognized by the Charter or by the Constitution. So could you tell us in what way that would contribute to harmonious relations and not the reverse?
Absolutely. I mean, the right to strike we see as being covered under as a charter right, and we believe that the right to strike really is the right to reach a fair collective agreement. Again, as I noted right off the top, no worker goes to a bargaining table and says, I want to go on strike because I think it would be nice to have a break from work. Nobody says that. The reality is what people want is a fair deal so that they can feed and house their families, so that they can have a good workplace relationship with their employers, so that they can address the issues that are at play within their workplace, whether they're health and safety, respect and dignity, hours of work issues, training, those kinds of issues. This legislation forces both parties to be very thoughtful about their approach at the bargaining table. It forces the parties to actually want to reach and conclude a collective agreement and to deal with the issues at hand and to take the opportunity to have in-depth, longer conversations rather than just saying a glib no or a glib we actually need this and, you know, we're pushing this agenda through. So the right to strike, the right to collective bargaining, the right to representation as a charter right is critically important to us. And this is simply modernizing what needs to happen in labor relations in Canada.
Merci, Madame Chabot. Monsieur Belarus, pour 2 minutes et
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Mr. Boulouris, 2 minutes and a half to conclude. Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Brusk, you talked about the 90-day time period that you find a bit too long and that you would like to see reduced to 45 days. In our previous discussions, a lot was said about the resources of Canadian Industrial Relations Board, their financial resources, the ability to train, capacity to train, and all that. That is not in the bill, but it has an impact in real life, like the possibility to go and check whether or not there are some secret replacement workers being used or have inspectors out in the field and investigations. To what extent is it important for the board to have those resources?
I have a great amount of respect for the Canada Industrial Relations Board, for the chair, and for all of the workers there that really work very hard to ensure that workers and employers get fair treatment when it comes to issues of dispute amongst, you know, whatever the issue of the day might be. We need to make sure that that board is properly resourced, that training and recruitment can happen, that we have long-term staff that are very well trained and have years of experience. These are difficult and challenging situations to try to intervene as a mediator or as a conciliation officer in a dispute. So you need to have the respect and the trust of the parties. It means a decades-long ability to understand the nuances that happen at the bargaining table and where the pressure is coming from both the employer and for the employee group, and being able to actually provide that assistance to those groups. So making sure that we have the resources at the Canada Industrial Relations Board is critically important so that they can do that hard work that we are all, as a society, relying on.
Merci beaucoup. Tout à fait d'accord, évidemment, avec ça, mais je voulais...
Thank you very much. And of course, I agree with that, but I'd like us to emphasize that aspect. You talked about the 18-month time period for implementation. It's spring 2024. It's going to go back to the House for the third reading, and then the Senate. We're in a minority government. We don't know when the next federal election will take place. You talked about reducing that 18-month time period. What would be the impact of keeping such a long time period of 18 months?
Again, the impact of that is that there's more chance of ongoing strikes that may happen in that 18-month period of time. We want to get to a point where there's more of an impetus for parties to actually gain a collective agreement that's being struck at the bargaining table. And we think 18 months, quite frankly, is far too long. So we're looking for a much shorter window of time. That means the CIRB needs to be properly resourced with the needs, having their needs met in order to deal with the essential services component of it, in order to give decisions in a more timely manner, and to make sure that they're staffing up in anticipation of this particular bill being passed.
Merci, Monsieur Belarus.
Thank you, Mr. Boulris.
To thank the witnesses for attending and addressing the questions from the committee members. We'll suspend for a few moments because we must go in camera to resume committee business. So again, to the witnesses, thank you for your attendance. We'll suspend for 3 minutes. Suspend.